It started with a group of boys who needed something. A strong male figure to look up to, someone to shield them from the constant friction of being different in a town full of conformists, where existing outside the popular crowd was an invitation to be mocked, harassed, or worse. Someone to stand between them and the bullies. It could have been wholesome. It could have been stories of late-night friendship, broken curfews, maybe even a few reckless stunts they'd laugh about years later. It could have been. But something more insidious was brewing. Fertilized by a shared conviction that the world was cruel and a growing urge to strike back at the society that had stacked the deck against them. And while most of them would have been content to hide behind Kevin Foster's bravado, Kevin had different ideas. Ideas steeped in extremist rhetoric, ideas that were dangerous. Every cult has a moment. The moment belief becomes action, when manipulation becomes the native tongue. When things twist dangerously sideways and what once felt like belonging starts to feel like a trap. It's the moment individuality folds under the weight of groupthink. And for the Lords of Chaos, that moment had seemingly already passed as the boys escalated from vandalism to stolen cars and arson. But they had no idea just how far Kevin Foster would push them. How one sentence, thrown out in a moment of anger and fear, would become a rallying cry. A fuse that once lit couldn't be suppressed, and it would change everything forever. We've already talked about how Kevin Foster held the door open, inviting the boys into a world of recklessness and adrenaline. But now we're going to watch him open a very different door, one that led straight to hell and drag them into the flames with him. Armed robbery, bombings, and eventually murder. The escalation from vandalism to homicide didn't take months or years, it took weeks. Just weeks of influence to go from destroying property to destroying lives. Cults make promises. They foster loyalty. They manipulate and they destroy. The Lords of Chaos might share some surface traits with a criminal gang, but make no mistake, they operated more like a cult. One dominant personality driven by dangerous ideologies, a group bound by loyalty at any cost, and at the center was Kevin Foster, a boy trying to become a man on a foundation of chaos, loss, and ultimately boredom. Kevin was a genius, but Kevin was deeply flawed. And when he decided to take the world down, he knew he couldn't do it alone. So he built his own army and indoctrinated them with his own beliefs. And the consequences would be permanent. Today we continue the story of the Lords of Chaos on our series Obedience to Ashes, Cults, Chaos, and Criminal Fires on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm just here for the marshmallows and moral ambiguity.
If we had a cult, which we absolutely do not, the only loyalty we demand is 5-star ratings and written reviews. But since we refuse to wield our overpowering influence for evil, we'll just kindly request that you help us grow our audience in ways that cost you nothing and definitely won't land you in prison. Specifically, leave us a rating, write a review, help us grow on social media. You can follow Crime to Burn on TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook, and YouTube. When you see content from us, tap that like button, leave a comment, and share it with your friends or your enemies. We don't judge. Podcasting isn't free, and unlike cults that try to control your bank account, we're only asking you for support that costs you nothing but takes only a few seconds of your time. And while we don't plan to slap our logo on any robes, you can grab a shirt with our logo on it. The link to our spread shop is in the show notes. Wear it proudly, start a conversation, confuse your neighbors.
Do we have kilts yet?
No.
That'd be cool. Crime to burn your kilt. It's a crime to burn your kilt.
Oh, and one more thing. We've applied to be featured on Apple Podcasts, and your support can make a huge difference. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, or you have Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to drop us a quick written review and make sure you've tapped that 5-star rating. It's fast, it's free, and it helps us stand out to the very people deciding who gets to be featured. So if you've got the app, we would be forever grateful for your help.
Hey, I would tap that 5-star rating.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
So drop those 5 stars like an offering at the altar of the algorithm. No robes required. There's also another way that you can support the show if you are in the market for a dog containment system. As you're all likely well aware, we do have a dog, Winston, and we desperately love Winston, but Winston is high energy and low impulse control.
And he's just one backyard away from a misdemeanor.
And we were desperate to find a containment system to keep him in our yard but allow him to run free to work off some of that hound dog energy. So after several failed attempts to use GPS and satellite collars from other brands, we purchased the Paulius wireless dog fence. No wires, no digging, no drama. It gives him the freedom to run.
Without turning the neighbor's garden into a crime scene.
Just sweet, invisible boundaries. Because Winston doesn't need a rap sheet.
Just a radius.
We've been so happy with the Paulius system that we contacted them and asked if we could be an affiliate, and they agreed. So if you're looking for a concern-free canine containment contraption to save your sanity, visit www.paulius.com, that's P-A-W-I-O-U-S, and if you use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout, you will get 10% off your purchase. Or you can find the affiliate link in our show notes. For each purchase made using the code CRIME2BURN, we will receive a small commission. But seriously, it's the first system we found that truly works to keep Winston happily hanging at home.
Instead of being the neighborhood's hooligan hound.
So zoomy right on over to www.paulius.com and remember to use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout. Now back to the reason you're really here.
Emotional trauma.
Last week, we opened the series talking about Kevin Foster, a kid in Fort Myers, Florida, a high school dropout with a genius-level IQ and a family background about as stable as a giraffe in high heels on an ice rink.
Allegedly.
But Kevin had access to guns, access to extremist literature that flowed through his family's pawn shop, and access to a group of gifted boys. Oddball boys. Boys with absent fathers or strained relationships at home. Misfits, outcasts, nerds, band geeks. Boys disillusioned with their place in the social hierarchy and the hand that life, and in their view society, had dealt to them. And that was all the opening Kevin Foster needed. Kevin wasn't teased, Kevin was feared. And when you felt powerless your whole life, powerful friends can be intoxicating. Then came the offer, rebellion, adrenaline, and belonging. As Kevin led them through nights of vandalism and chaos, he was handing out his version of the proverbial Kool-Aid, getting them hooked on destruction and feeding them a warped ideology dressed up as social justice. And yes, he shit on a few street signs along the way, because apparently, biohazardous vandalism is the new calling card of the truly unhinged. Kevin escalated from vandalism to grand theft auto and bomb threats faster than a toddler can have a meltdown in a grocery store checkout line.
That escalated quickly.
And once the group had a name, the Lords of Chaos, and code names for each member, Kevin was ready to unveil his grand plan. If there was one thing that seemed to really piss Kevin off, it was Coca-Cola? I'm not sure what Coke ever did to him. Maybe he was still bitter about the whole new Coke fiasco, even though the company did walk that back. But for whatever reason, Kevin had chosen the historic Coca-Cola bottling plant in Fort Myers as his next target, because stealing cars and public defecation wasn't cutting it anymore. He wanted impact, recognition, fear. He wanted to make a statement to the town, to law enforcement, and especially to that newspaper reporter who had dared to call him pea-brained. This time, Kevin wasn't just going to destroy something, he was going to blow it up. And he was going to use his newly minted crew of followers to do it. And Kevin had a reason for escalating so quickly. April 19th marked the anniversary of both the Waco siege and the Oklahoma City bombing. Kevin held a sick admiration for Timothy McVeigh, and he wanted to throw his hat into the anarchist ring with a felonious act of terrorism.
Well, I don't think they qualified themselves as anarchists because they're a little bit too organized.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. Sounds like posering.
Unfortunately for Kevin, his crew was less well-oiled machine and more stoned teenagers fumbling through a real-life episode of Jackass. The plan was to steal a vehicle to commit the crime, and they tried, but the robbery fell apart when Burnett, who showed up stoned and already paranoid, got twitchy and started the getaway car too early, drawing attention to them before they'd even broken into the target vehicle. They had to abandon the truck and regroup. Later that night, they returned to try again. But this time, there were witnesses in the area, so once again, they bailed. The repeated failures pushed Kevin off schedule. He missed the intended target date, April 19th, as the clock ticked past midnight, but he wasn't willing to give up. Even if the timing wasn't perfect, he was still determined to make a statement to the town, to the cops, and most of all to the reporter that had insulted him. Kevin was ready to prove that the Lords of Chaos would live up to their manifesto, that they were, in his words, bringing with them balls of titanium as they usher in a new god whose fiery hand shall lay waste to the populace.
In their words.
Kevin's words, not mine. So despite the lack of a stolen getaway vehicle, in the wee hours of April 20th, the crew rolled up to a Starvin' Marvin convenience store. Outside the store was an enclosure holding propane tanks for gas grills. As some of the boys began cutting the lock to access the tanks, Kevin and Burnett had a falling out. And if there's one thing a cult leader cannot tolerate, it's dissent.
Hell no.
Burnett expressed doubts. He wasn't sure he wanted to go through with this. So Kevin, ever the voice of reason, note intense sarcasm, pulled a gun and held it to Burnett's head.
Ooh,
He gave him a choice: join them in executing the catastrophic Coca-Cola conflagration, or die.
That's really dramatic.
Burnett, realizing just how unhinged Kevin had become, made the only logical choice: survival. He agreed to participate. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew was loading propane tanks into the back of their truck. What they didn't notice was the security cameras recording their every move. What they did notice was the guy across the way at the grocery store watching them steal the tanks. So they bailed before they could get all of the tanks they had planned, which meant they were going to have to make another stop. Next up, a hardware store for more propane tanks. Then, off to lay waste to a monument of capitalism. An abandoned building. You see, the old Coca-Cola bottling plant was empty, forgotten. It was historic, and there were rumors that developers were eyeing the space hoping to preserve its architectural character while redeveloping the site. Kevin had different plans. He was going to redevelop it all right, but his methods were a bit louder, a lot faster, and of course, felonious. With a pickup truck full of stolen propane, a crew of teenage boys, and at this point probably a little lingering tension from having a gun held to his head, Burnett, Kevin, and 4 other members of the Lords of Chaos made their way to the old Coca-Cola bottling plant. The plan was simple, if crude. Each of the boys would place propane tanks throughout the building. Kevin had rigged up a small homemade bomb to trigger the explosion once the tanks were in place and opened, allowing propane to fill the space. And as an extra thematic flourish, Kevin built the triggering device out of a Pepsi can. Because nothing says revolutionary act of terror like lighting capitalism on fire with a rival brand's logo.
Man, he did get pretty on point with the branding, you gotta be honest.
Once the tanks were in place and the valves opened, Kevin would light a fuse he'd run to a window. Then, all they had to do was light it and retreat a safe distance to watch the show. That was the idea, anyway. But things started going sideways almost immediately. First of all, one of the boys forgot his gloves, an amateur mistake that meant fingerprints everywhere. Then Derek Shields, perhaps inspired by the spirit of absolute destruction, decided it was fine to break out windows before the setup was complete. Kevin, ever the humble and emotionally stable leader, lost it. He tore into Derek for going rogue and making unnecessary noise that could get them caught. Individual thought was not part of the program. Groupthink only, please. And the comedy of errors didn't stop here. Despite clear instructions to wait until the setup was complete, a few of the boys opened their propane tanks too early, filling the air with flammable gas while Kevin was still trying to wire the fuse and position the device. Because nothing says flawless execution like accidentally turning your crime scene into a gas chamber with yourselves inside. But despite their inability to operate as a cohesive, well-oiled capitalism-crushing machine, everyone managed to escape the building in one piece. Kevin had chosen a long enough fuse to give the group plenty of time to reach a nearby vantage point and watch the carnage unfold. And minutes after they evacuated, boom. A massive explosion rocked the area, sending glass and debris across the adjacent highway. It was loud, it was violent, it was everything Kevin wanted. Well, almost.
That was a propane explosion?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty good. Honestly, that's pretty impressive.
But while Kevin may have been a genius, he definitely didn't pass architecture. Turns out, taking a few community college classes doesn't teach you how to level an entire brick and concrete industrial building with a bootleg Pepsi can bomb and some stolen propane.
I was impressed by the glass flying, not anything, yeah.
Still, he did start one hell of a fire, and that was enough to land him on the front page of all the local papers, even if the papers didn't exactly know who to credit. At this point, they'd likely received the Lords of Chaos's manifesto, but whoever was responsible for sorting the mail at the newsroom must have read it, blinked twice, and tossed it into the file where insane missives to the editor go to die. Because let's be honest, no well-adjusted person goes on a vandalism rampage after mailing in a pre-announcement, and it takes a very special flavor of delusion to refer to your crimes even the big, loud fireball-filled ones as, quote, the coming of a new god, unquote. But the boys didn't have time to worry about whether the newspaper was taking the Lords of Chaos seriously. They were too busy celebrating their criminal achievements. Riding high on the wave of chaotic pride in a job almost well done, the crew returned to Kevin's house. And who can sleep after launching a homemade bomb at a historic building? So instead, they basked in their sinister success and began hatching a new plan. For the boys who hadn't dropped out of school, it was senior year and it was winding down, and that meant one thing: grad night at Disney World.
What?
Grad night at Disney World.
Is that a regular thing?
Apparently it is.
Sounds kind of fun, really.
You had to be a student to buy tickets, but several of the boys still were, so that wouldn't be a problem. Kevin wanted in, even though he wasn't graduating. But this wasn't just about sneaking into the park. Kevin's plan was deranged. He wanted to take a Disney park employee, one wearing a character costume, hostage, steal the costume, and then while disguised as a beloved cartoon character, wander the park with a gun and start shooting.
Did he have a specific character in mind?
No, not that they told us.
Just any would do.
He claimed that with a homemade suppressor, he could make his gun whisper quiet and delay detection long enough to cause mass casualties before anyone realized what was happening. In his mind, it would be the ultimate act of rebellion, a massacre in the most wholesome place on Earth.
Whoa, that's too far.
Okay.
The most wholesome place on Earth, I think you know where that is.
Okay.
Dollywood.
In his mind, it would be the ultimate act of rebellion, a massacre in the happiest place on Earth?
But you call it whatever you want to. Not wholesome, though. That's reserved for Dolly's personality.
And that wasn't the only plan they were cooking up. While Kevin and his cohorts fantasized about the theme park carnage, fire investigators were digging through the rubble of the Coca-Cola plant, trying to figure out what had caused the blaze. Inside the building, they found the remains of several propane tanks. 4 pairs of 22-gallon tanks, to be exact. It didn't take long to determine that the fire was arson. Meanwhile, employees at the Starvin' Marvin convenience store were working to resecure their outdoor propane cage. And when they saw the news reports about the explosion, alongside reports that propane tanks had been found in the rubble, they wondered, could those be our tanks? They called police. And here's the thing. Propane tanks have serial numbers. Each one can be traced back to its distributor. The police assured them a fire investigator would be there shortly to take their statements, and the store manager, to their credit, locked the surveillance footage from the night of the theft in the office safe just to be sure it didn't accidentally get taped over. A small act of diligence that would soon become a key piece of evidence. But as Kevin and the crew of Chaos plotted their next big move, things went sideways in a completely different way. You see, Kevin still had a suspended license, but you can't let a little plastic card or the law get in the way of being a full-time douche canoe. So on Sunday, April 21st, Kevin was out cruising around in his truck. A truck that contained a ton of stolen property from their scavenger hunts and so-called Nights of Terror, and multiple tools used to steal cars. And while Kevin was many things, charismatic, manipulative, egomaniacal, he was not persuasive enough to talk his way out of a traffic stop once the officer realized that his license was suspended. Kevin was arrested on the spot. Now here's where it gets baffling. Instead of impounding his truck, the one with the literal crime starter kit inside, police allowed Kevin's friends who were with him at the time to take the vehicle and drive it home. Kevin was hauled off in cuffs to the local jail, where his mother Ruby would eventually bail him out. And if you thought Kevin was pissed at the reporter who called him a pea-brain, well, that paled in comparison to his feelings about the cop who arrested him. Fueled by rage, bruised ego, and whatever fumes he was running on at this point, Kevin began a new assault plan. But this time, the targets weren't just abandoned buildings. He began eyeing 2 very much not vacant buildings. The first, a local hospital. The second, directly inspired by his arrest, was the Justice Center itself.
Okay, the Justice Center, fine. The hospital.
I'm telling you, this guy is twisted. Because of course, when you've been busted for driving without a license and carrying half a hardware store of burglary tools, the natural next step is to bomb the building where court happens. And honestly, I'd expect nothing less from a guy who once stole the fender off a marked police car. Because Kevin Foster didn't just break laws, he collected felonies like they were Pokemon cards. But before we could collect a Snorlax or bomb the Justice Center, our little merry band of mayhem makers was going to need some dough. enter Derek Shields.
I think you have to evolve a Snorlax.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
I might be wrong. I've honestly never encountered a wild Snorlax. Although, I hope to.
Not only did Derek have an idea for a quick payday, but it would also scratch a personal itch he'd been carrying for months. You see, Derek's mom had been perpetually behind on rent, several months behind in fact. And while that would have gotten most tenants evicted, Derek had a unique advantage. He worked at a diner owned by the same man who owned the house his mother was living in. When his mom called him at school one day in a full-blown meltdown saying that the landlord was finally threatening eviction, it absolutely lit Derek's fuse. That same day, he went to work and had it out with his boss, whom he believed had insulted his mother. Derek quit on the spot, claiming he couldn't keep working there without hurting the man out of sheer rage. The irony? It turns out that the only reason the landlord had not evicted them earlier was Derek's continued employment at his diner. The man was all bark, until Derek walked out. Then the eviction happened, and Derek had been carrying that grudge ever since. And now he had a crew, and better yet, he had intel. He knew exactly what time his former boss left the diner each night with the day's cash deposits en route to the bank. It should have been easy. But nothing is easy when your crew is made up of comic book nerds and band kids pulling shifts at the local Hardee's, which is where Derek had landed after ditching the diner. Instead of training, they had, as they put it, balls of titanium, which they apparently thought was a solid replacement for skill, coordination, or even the faintest whisper of a solid plan. They were wrong, but up to this point their misconceptions had at least been mildly amusing. But that's about to change, because things are about to take a deadly turn. Now Derek couldn't participate in the diner robbery himself. The owner knew him and would have recognized him immediately. So the boys planned the robbery for a night when Derek would be working his shift at Hardee's. That way he'd have a rock-solid alibi serving up cholesterol and french fries while his crew played criminal dress-up across town. And while Derek's alibi was airtight, Kevin's execution of the robbery was less solid. More like the ooze of a sentient lava lamp, hot, chaotic, and in motion, but not in any way that suggested forethought or coordination. First, Kevin got to work on a suppressor for his gun. He took some PVC pipe, painted it black, and performed some kind of garage voodoo to transform it into what he claimed was a fully functional silencer. Then he marched out into the backyard, fired a few rounds, and announced with great confidence that it was whisper quiet.
I've made a forward-directional device.
It was not. In fact, police would later test the makeshift suppressor after Kevin's arrest and confirmed that it reduced the sound about as effectively as one of those miracle weight loss belts from the late-night infomercials that promises to turn you from saggy into snatched overnight.
Those are awesome. I lost 400 pounds with that thing.
Barely, if at all. But decibels be damned, Kevin believed in himself, and in his delusionally overinflated sense of engineering prowess. To him, this homemade contraption would be enough to keep his sinister plan quiet, deadly, and undetectable. On the night of April 25th, just 5 days after the Coca-Cola bottling plant bombing, Kevin, Pete, and Chris, or rather, God, Fried, and Slim, set off for the diner after confirming that Derek was safely installed at his Hardee's shift.
You know what? That sounds like some really awesome beef jerky. I'm just saying, we could
God,
probably
Fried, and
market
Slim.
that. Yeah.
Chris was the designated driver, not because he wasn't willing to commit the crime, but because, as he himself acknowledged, he was just a little too chunky to run quickly if things went sideways. The plan was simple. Chris would drop Kevin and Pete off behind the diner.
That sounds like you're taking it. Next time I go behind a diner, I'm going to drop Kevin and Pete off.
They'd wait for the owner to leave with the day's cash, ambush him, and then run to a predetermined pickup spot where Chris would be waiting. But this is Kevin's world, and in Kevin's world, things never go to plan. While Kevin and Pete crouched behind the building, they got into a conversation, because of course they did. The conversation was about who should be holding which gun. In the middle of swapping weapons, they got surprised. The diner owner suddenly appeared mid-shift, catching them totally off guard.
And then surprise, but...
Nope.
Oh.
It turns out, though, he wasn't leaving with the night's deposit. He was just stepping out to his car to break a $100 bill to prepare the cash drawer for the morning breakfast rush.
Narrowly avoided, but...
Kevin was furious, but flexible. Instead of risking the whole job by waiting for more cash, he improvised. They would just take the man's car. He had his keys in his hand, why not? So they jumped into his Chevy Blazer and tore out of the parking lot. Chris, aka Slim, was watching from a distance when he saw this Blazer speed away, and he had no idea what had just happened. Assuming something had gone wrong, he drove off to the predetermined meetup spot. But Kevin and Pete never showed, because they hadn't run from the scene, they'd driven. And honestly, they really didn't seem particularly pressed about finding Chris. Their priority was ditching the stolen vehicle before police caught wind of what had happened.
That makes a little sense, right?
They drove the Blazer to a safe location, searched it, and inside they found a bag containing about $500.
What? So they ditched the car and left their cash in it?
No, they drove the Blazer to a safe location, and when they searched it, they found a bag inside that had about $500 worth of cash in it.
They stole the Blazer.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Almost didn't track it.
Not the haul they were hoping for, but better than nothing. Now, according to Kevin's own crew rules...
It's a lot better than some cassette tapes and loose change.
Now, according to Kevin's own crew rules, any money from a job was supposed to be split equally. But Kevin and Pete decided the others didn't need to know about the $500 they'd found. They told the group that they'd only gotten the $100 bill and some cash from the victim's wallet, just enough for everyone to walk away with around $30 each.
They'll get your bus back home.
Meanwhile, Kevin and Pete split the $500 between themselves quietly, because what the others didn't know wouldn't hurt them. And Kevin? Well, Kevin wrote the rules, and bending rules was kind of his specialty. Bending the truth, bending minds, bending morality. Basically, anything Kevin came into contact with was at risk of gaining a few unplanned angles.
So he's breaking the pirate code.
Yeah. Kevin and Pete, now carless and cash-stuffed, walked to Burnett's house where they spun a lie so thin you could have flossed with it. They told Burnett's mom that they'd run out of gas just up the street. Classic stranded teenager move, and she bought it. So Burnett left with them to go get gas. But once in the car, they decided that finding Chris, their getaway driver, was less important than other priorities, like food, Taco Bell specifically. So they stopped to grab some grub while poor Chris drove around aimlessly trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Eventually, Chris circled back to the diner only to find the police swarming the parking lot and no signs of his friends, no car, no contact, no clue. With growing panic, he drove to Burnett's house. Now, Mama Burnett confirmed to him that yes, the boys had just been here very recently, in fact, and she kindly paged them for him. Which must have been an unbelievable moment of cognitive dissonance for Chris, like walking into a blind date and realizing she's your cousin. When the crew finally regrouped, Kevin put on a show, feigning outrage over the meager score. He dramatically lamented the wasted time, the failed plan, and his allegedly flawless silencer engineering, all for a payout of just $30 each. Derek joined the group after finishing his Hardy shift, just in time to find everyone frustrated, broke, and needing an outlet. And since they couldn't risk driving the stolen Blazer around town, they chose to take out their frustration on the Blazer itself. They smashed it up as best they could, windows, door panels, whatever they could damage, and then they left it abandoned. Days later, the police found the vehicle battered, abandoned, and missing that bag of cash that the victim had told the cops was inside the car. And Derek's mom. Turns out she still kept in touch with her old landlord, because not long after the robbery, he told her about what had happened. He mentioned the $100 and the few dollars they'd gotten from his wallet, but most importantly, he mentioned that bag of cash that had been in the car.
Wait, I got lost. What was the $100?
He was on his way out to the car because he had a $100 bill he needed to break from the bag of money in his car for the cash register.
Right, sorry.
So when he's talking to Derek's mom, he mentioned the $100 and the few dollars they'd lifted from his wallet, and most importantly, he mentioned the bag of cash that had been in the car. And she told Derek. Now, I have to assume that Chris wasn't the only one feeling a little cognitive dissonance, because when Derek confronted Kevin and Pete, they feigned ignorance about the mystery bag of cash. But Derek knew Kevin, knew his titanium testicle talk was always backed up by a fierce dedication to looking out for number one, and Derek knew one thing for sure. He was not number one. But Derek didn't have time to bask in suspicion. He had things to do and people to impress, and apparently some chaos cred to flash around.
That's nice.
Because Derek wasn't the only one trying to put a little extra polish on his titanium balls. It seems like all of the guys started getting a little loose with the rules. Bragging, hinting, letting things slip to friends who weren't technically in the inner circle. Because nothing says criminal mastermind like casually name-dropping your underground anarchist club during fourth period biology. And with grad night at Disney World coming up, the boys realized they would need some new threads to look the part. But the $30 take from the robbery wasn't going to outfit them in the finest that Dillard's had to offer, so they decided on a different strategy. The plan? Pick out some clothes, create a distraction, and make a run for it.
Well, you gotta have a good look on. You gotta have some drip going whenever you start a cult and start causing mass chaos.
Criminal geniuses, truly. Their distraction of choice? A smoke grenade. Yes, like an actual one. They allegedly picked it up from an army surplus store, which, side note, I didn't even realize was possible.
Whoa. Like a live smoke thing?
That's what they said in the book.
I want to go to that store. That sounds awesome.
But Kevin assured his crew that it was a live smoke grenade. And he rigged it so he could pull the pin from a distance using fishing line, because nothing says professional operation like bass tournament materials. And before the operation kicked off, they even stole a license plate off of another vehicle to slap onto their getaway car just in case anyone grabbed a tag number as they fled the scene.
See, if he really had the chaos clout, he would have pulled that pin with his teeth.
And honestly, that was the last thing that went right. Because once inside Dillard's, the smoke grenade completely failed. No smoke, no chaos, no distraction. The only thing they left with was the clothes they had walked in wearing and a $30 lesson in why you shouldn't buy military-grade distractions from an underpaid clerk at a janky military surplus store. It was April 30th, 10 days since the Coke plant bombing, 5 days since the botched diner robbery, and the crew was itching for another hit of adrenaline. So naturally, they went to the one place no high school kid has ever equated with excitement. Back to the high school. Their plan was to finish what they had started a couple weeks before.
Hey, obviously they had never been to high school with me.
You might remember from last episode that they had already smashed the payphone and broken an auditorium window, and now they decided to go back and finish the job. Somehow they got into the building. It's not exactly clear how, but at the time there was an open house for the band going on. An event attended by none other than band director Mark Schwebes. And it's likely that they just waltzed in through the front door, blending in with the event. Once inside, they began wandering the halls, gathering whatever objects they could find to aid in their destruction. Among the tools they collected were several staplers, a fire extinguisher, and bizarrely, a few cans of peaches.
Have you seen my stapler? It's a red swing line. Have you seen my stapler?
All of which they could use to smash out glass and further vandalize the auditorium. And here's where that detail becomes unsettling. Those same staplers, fire extinguisher, and can of peaches, they would later be found by police inside Mark Schwebes' vehicle parked outside the home where he had been shot to death on his front porch.
You know what? Honestly, I feel like I could also cause chaos with those items.
The crew of boys was making their way back around the outside of the school building, arms full of looted supplies for their evening demolition, when Mark Schwebes pulled out of his parking space. He had just finished attending the band open house and was headed off to meet friends for dinner. But then he saw them, a group of teens loitering near the smashed payphone, near the auditorium where the windows had recently been broken, and something clicked. Mark detoured toward the group, intent on confronting them, and our brain trust of criminal prodigies immediately sprang into action by trying to hide their gloved hands behind their back. Because nothing screams innocence like a bunch of high school boys awkwardly shuffling around a broken payphone, hands behind their backs. I mean, I'm just picturing this, they had to look so freaking guilty. When Schwebes asked them what they were doing, they claimed they were just using the phone, to which he calmly pointed out that phone doesn't work, because remember they had busted it a couple weeks before.
Right.
And he told them to get lost. And they could have grabbed their bag of staplers and peaches and walked away, and that could have been the end of it, but no, of course not. They argued, claimed they were waiting for their ride, and this is where they had told them to meet them. That's when Mark stepped out of his vehicle for a closer look, and that's when he saw it all. The gloves, the random arsenal of vandalism supplies, including that fire extinguisher, several staplers, and yes, canned peaches. He demanded to see their hands, and when he saw they were gloved, the warning bells were deafening. Then came recognition. He locked eyes with Derek. "Don't I know you?" he asked. Derek shook his head no. But Mark wasn't buying it. He recognized the face. Derek was one of his students. And in a final effort to scare them straight, he confiscated the vandalism toolkit, peaches and all, and warned the boys that the school resource officer would be in touch first thing in the morning. And at the threat of confrontation by the school resource officer, our hardened criminals suddenly softened back into high school kids. This could mean trouble. This could mean expulsion. Graduation was just a couple weeks away, and it could be at risk. And more than that, Their entire criminal enterprise could come crashing down.
All these things we've built over the years.
These boys were scared. But Kevin wasn't scared. Kevin had already dropped out, and Kevin wasn't thinking about graduation, but Kevin was furious. He was mad about the botched diner robbery. He was mad about the dud smoke bomb. Mad that he still didn't have snazzy new clothes to wear to grad night where he planned to carry out a horrific act of violence. But now worst of all, a band teacher. Someone outside the group could unravel everything with a single phone call. Kevin was livid. And then someone said it. It wasn't a rally cry, it wasn't a command, it was just a statement. Somebody has to die tonight. Because that was in the rules, the official Lords of Chaos rules. If anyone threatened the group, they had to die.
It's been ratified.
Never mind that talking about the group was also supposed to be punishable by death, and all of them had broken that rule a dozen times over. This was different. This was external pressure. And if there's one thing that cements a cult's loyalty, it is a perceived enemy on the outside. A fire extinguisher, some staplers, and a few cans of peaches just became motive for murder. And Kevin latched onto it.
Like a young suckling on a titty.
Someone has to die tonight, and that someone would be Mark Schwebes. Because by the time he got to school tomorrow and opened a yearbook and recognized Derek, Chris, and Pete, and put the pieces together, it would be too late. Unless Kevin acted first. Mark Schwebes would have to die tonight. Derek dissented. Death seemed like a harsh sentence for a teacher he knew, someone who, up until that moment, had simply tried to scare them straight. But dissent in the face of an already enraged Kevin was like pouring gasoline on a smoldering fire. Burnett didn't think Kevin was serious. After all, Kevin had said he was going to kill the diner owner and hadn't. He'd blustered before. But Pete, Kevin's most loyal disciple, wasn't interested in dissuading him. And Chris, the same Chris who'd once driven in circles desperate to find his friends after the diner robbery, only to realize they'd prioritized Taco Bell over locating him, well, he wasn't about to challenge Kevin either. And just like that, a plan was in motion. What followed was honestly insanity. Now, some of the boys bailed out early, curfews to make, consciences to live with, but Pete, Kevin, Chris, and a very reluctant Derek all piled into one car. They drove to Kevin's house and collected weapons. Then, like something out of a nightmare soaked in suburban nihilism, they called 411 to get Mark Schwebes' home address. Derek was still the voice.
Whoa! They called 411 to get a home address?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I remember calling 411 for information, but I didn't realize you could get a home address off a name from that.
Well, and that's funny because the guys were like, oh yeah, well we found his phone number, but we don't know his address. And so Kevin made them call 411 to see if they could get his address, and none of them thought you could get addresses from 411, and 411 was like, oh yeah, here it is.
What?
Yeah, they were all like, oh.
That's crazy. I mean, maybe that's normal, but I think it's crazy. It sounds crazy.
Derek was still the voice of reason, still hesitant, still afraid. But Kevin rode him hard and pushed every button he could. He told Derek that if he didn't participate, if he stood in the way, then he would be the one who had to die. And he made this statement with a gun pointing at Derek's head. Because remember, somebody had to die tonight, and if it wasn't going to be Mark Schwebes, then it may as well be Derek. So what's it going to be, Kevin asked. Do you help us kill Mark Schwebes, or do I kill you? They drove to Mark Schwebes' house, none of them really believing Kevin was going to follow through. They'd heard him bluster before. They thought this was just more of the same. Only Derek seemed to be nearing a full mental collapse over what was happening. Chris and Pete would stay in the car. Derek, who Mark knew, who had been one of his students, would knock on the door. Mark would recognize him from the school that night. He'd see a distraught teenager on his doorstep, and he'd open the door, disarmed by the familiarity and by concern. Kevin would be hiding in the bushes with a shotgun. Because as Kevin explained, you can't trace shotgun pellets back to the gun. There's no rifling in the barrel, no twist patterns, no ballistic fingerprints. And the boys, they believed him. They trusted Kevin, the one who knew the guns. Never mind that this was the same Kevin who once accidentally shot himself in the stomach while allegedly trying to uncock a revolver.
I was just about to say that.
And the same Kevin who engineered a PVC pipe suppressor so ineffective it barely muffled a whisper, let alone a gunshot.
Like a cat can.
But this time, he couldn't be wrong because Kevin knew guns. Spoiler alert, Kevin was wrong. Derek walked to Mark's door, just a boy, knowing Kevin had drawn a line in the sand. It's Mark's life or yours. Derek didn't want to die. Kevin had already pointed a gun at his head once tonight. So Derek did the only thing he felt like he could. He put one foot in front of the other, waited for Kevin to get into position, knocked on the door. And as soon as Mark opened it, Derek ran. Mark, confused, stepped outside, and Kevin fired. The first blast hit Mark in the head, and then Kevin fired again, shooting Mark in the backside. Then he chased after Derek. As they made their escape, Derek balled up in the seat, trembling, unraveling. What had he done? Kevin, on the other hand, was laughing, joking, bragging that he'd shot Mark in the ass for good measure because he'd heard Mark was gay. Mark was not gay, he had a girlfriend, but facts didn't really matter to Kevin. Kevin had done it, he'd taken a life. He dragged 3 boys, clever, artistic, gifted program kids, boys just looking for a place to fit in and to belong, and he turned them into murderers. He bent their minds, he bent their morals, and he bent their ideologies. And Kevin felt invincible. But Kevin wasn't invincible. He just wasn't done yet. And we'll wrap up this case next week with the finale of Obedience to Ashes on Crime to Burn. These microphones can pick up a gnat fart.
I'm basically the human embodiment of a gnat fart. You want to have babies or not?
Not today.
Hey, quiet on the set. They said don't play with fire. I said define play. Now I teach fire safety with panache.
Is it panache or panache?
And now that I heard me say it, it sounds right.
Panache.
I want a second opinion. No, stop it. You're just trying to impregnate my mind with your bad ideas.
I'm telling.
Bring back the French guy. But I heard that dude say panache, and he was French.
He started with panache, though.
But he ended with panache. Will you just make your robot tell me something to say? I am the beaver noodle. I am the beaver noodle. He called a ferret a spaghetti beaver. I was a little bit maybe inebriated one night when I went to make my name on the VR thing. You got to make a name for it or whatever because you don't want to use your real name. And I was going to put in spaghetti beaver, but I was a little tipsy and f***ed up and said beaver noodle.
Okay, y'all have a show to do.
We're doing it right now. And I'm a sentient pile of charred insulation, given life by lightning strikes and a grudge. And I'm a government experiment designed to detect accelerants, but I went rogue. And I'm a box of strike-anywhere matches with abandonment issues. This one hit really close to home. I'm going to have to talk to my counselor about this one. Yeah, my dad helped me get lubricated earlier.
Okay.
I'll be giving you a post-mortem on all that.
With panache?
With extra panache.
Panache sounds like a dessert. But something more insidious was brewing.
Insidious, not insidious.
Thank you. But something more...
Insidious.
Thank you. Why can't I? Why don't I know
you
that
can
word?
do it. Let's do it together. Let's go. Insidious.
Damn it.
Stop it.
Insidious.
You're in the city with us. Insidious. I just burped on your... But it felt good. It was bad, but it felt good.
But now we're going to watch him open a very different door.
The back door. And I'm this f***ing guy.
Sorry, that snuck up on me.
Yeah, better out than in, I say. Does your ass ever close, or does it just breathe constantly?
I have not farted once.
I have never seen anyone inhale with their asshole before.
I almost passed out.
I don't think that's how the Kool-Aid works.
And yes, he hit on a few street signs along the way, because apparently... I knew I wasn't going to get through that.
Can you imagine the incredible balance and concentration that takes? To get up on top of a street sign, drop trow, and boop.
Okay.
You got to be like a Zen master. There's a lot of to get control of there. Just specifically your sphincter.
And once the group had a name, the Lords of Chaos, and code names for each member, Kevin was ready to
How would you like to be a verb in the past tense? It's too much English for you.
But
I stand by what I said.
But
it's...
Just the size of the seesaw just wouldn't go all the way up.
And is that because I didn't weigh enough? Can I get another beer while you're burping?
Yeah.
You want me to come pat you on the back, baby?
No.
How about the butt?
Definitely not. Whose ass were you patting earlier?
Oh, I activated Suck Norris.
Suck Norris?
That's
What's his name?
That's what we named the vacuum cleaner.
When you
We gotta go home and name all of our inanimate objects. Uranus? What's this thing? I can't tell what that says.
There's no anus. Why are you seeing anuses, dude?
I'm talking about right up here.
Suck anus?
What does that say?
Did you say suck anus?
No, you did.
It says shark.
Oh.
But you saw anus. Yet you saw anus.
Have you ever seen a shark's anus?
I have, in fact.
I have too.
Way too close.
Scary.
Yeah.
How many dicks does a shark have?
At least 6?
2.
Oh. Back, demon! Back to hell with you! The power of Christ! If you get one of these, don't let it run into a hallway where it could potentially run over some recently laid down live cat. You gotta get into the manual of arms and break down Suck Norris and save his life, but first you have to quarantine him for 6 weeks. I was seaman first class.
No, just semen first.
No sans class. There was no class. I just got in there. I did what I had to do. I overcame the obstacles. I have things to throw. Shush! Or I'll make you read a book!
So despite the lack of a stolen getaway...
Hey, I see what you're doing over there. Knock it off. Keep your hands to yourself. No over-the-pants handies in my studio. Knock it off. Relax the tongue.
It absolutely licked
balls.
to pick up spot where Chris... Why can't I say Chris? Chris. Okay.
Let's say it together.
Chris.
At this time, I'd like to recognize that 100% of our studio guests have indeed fallen asleep. Sorry, I visualized that too hard. I want some chaos cred. Why don't I have any chaos cred? I'm a little jealous of this guy's chaos cred.
Hold on to your butts. We got 2 more things to
How
go
many
through.
butts do you think I have? I only have the one ass.
You can hold on to mine if you need extra.
Just cross your legs and do the pee-pee dance.
Oh, my sphincter just inhaled. Are you dropping coconuts? Well, you sure there wasn't a bitch slap involved?
I didn't hear about one.
Bitch slaps go underreported.
Then, like something out of a nightmare Nope.
Smothered in onions and underwear. She's probably going to hell. What'd the Waymo car do to you? Can we compromise? Can I just show my ass? Don't touch Snoopy like that. You're gonna make Winston terribly jealous.
We're the only 2 in the room that's behaving ourselves.
I'm a beacon of awkwardness.
The people love that crap. We've got the gear to almost make it look like you know what you're doing. This is how Highlanders become more powerful. Don't look at me like that. It makes sense.
We're gonna need kilts.
Acknowledge it. Everyone acknowledge it. I need a slow clap. Let's give me a slow clap. Let's go. Come on. Yeah. I'm basking in that. It would be a weird place to keep a picture of your mother.
I've never been a Scottish man.
I mean, not your mother. Anywhere I keep a picture of your mother is appropriate, but like... Usually the prison wallet's in the back.
My butt's asleep.
Mine is nearing on narcoleptic ass.
It's fine. We're married. It's legal and everything.
It's all legal. I like to bring the fucking drama. God, now I have an awkward boner in front of my parents.
This episode brought to you by Awkward Boners.
Get you one.
Or don't.
I gotta really pee bad.
That's a good way to stop right there.
On the morning of July 31st, 2018,